don't feel... I mean, since Jeremy Corbyn won the leadership, there's been a lot of disunity, well, certainly reported disunity in the Parliamentary Labour Party. I think of Trident and Syria. But Europe is one issue where you could say there is unity, really, bar a few MPs. So why are you trying to create disunity when it's unnecessary in the Labour Party?
Well, I think that Jeremy's position is secure. All this talk from some members of the Parliamentary Labour Party about overthrowing is absurd, and he will remain secure until those who wish to have him replaced find an alternative leader. The reason why I spoke today was that if you look at leaving up what's happened to our vote in Scotland aside, in England, I mean, since Tony Blair's heyday, we've lost well over 4 million votes. Well over 3 million people have moved to abstention, and UKIP has had over equally an increasing vote of 3 million. Now, I'm not saying that all of those have just moved from the Labour Party, but we do know at the last election something almost touching 1 million people who previously voted Labour crossed over to UKIP, and they did so because they thought we had a Labour Party that did not represent in public debate their real interests.
But the settled view now in Labour is the one to back Remain. And you look at the Conservative Party, and that is a classic case of a party that is, split on this key issue, and voters don't like divided parties. So I say to you, why highlight something that actually, certainly in parliamentary terms, you just don't represent anyone?
Well, as one of our great leaders said, that you can have unanimity in the graveyard. The truth is, it's crucially important if we're going to bid and be successful to win power next time, that we don't have another tranche of Labour voters feeling that they are so unrepresented by the parliamentary leadership that they vote to leave and they are voting for UKIP candidates. I want them to go into the polling booth to express it's 40% of our supporters are in support of leaving, to do so as proud Labour members, not as potential renegade UKIP voters.
Why would leaving the EU be good for working people in your mind?
Oh, I think the key thing is that we would actually be able to control our borders. And from that...
people would argue we do control our borders.
Well, I've heard people argue that. I mean, we had David Miliband.
We do have passport controls at our borders.
Visiting. We do not actually have... We had no control over, since the accession countries joining, we've had 5.3 million people coming into this country.
That was Labour's fault for not putting transitional controls into some extent in those years.
And you had me on this programme saying we shouldn't do that and criticising the Labour government for doing so. And then it wasn't then about, that somehow the Labour Party should be united on that issue.
Right. I mean, what do you say to that in terms of working people would be best represented by parties wanting to leave because their fortunes would improve?
Well, I don't accept that, and I rather like the tone as it happens, and it's perhaps ridiculous for me to be on defending Jeremy Corbyn and Frank attacking him, but I thought the tone that he set in his speech of not being uncritical towards Europe, but saying, look, on balance in terms of workers' rights, social protection, there is a good track record to defend. I thought that actually was the right argument, the right balance. But I'll tell you what gives the lie to Frank's idea about why people vote. I mean, the SNP is a pro-European party, not uncritically pro-European, but still pro-European, but have been massively successful at the ballot box. So the idea of by being pro-European is going to damage people's electoral fortunes is certainly not upheld by the evidence in Scotland. Now, I know there are other factors, Frank, but nonetheless, it's an argument I think you've got to answer.
Indeed, I think Scotland's another country. And I actually do think we will move to a position where you have independence, and I hope we will then push for a parliament of all the countries, with England having sovereign parliament like you have, Wales and Northern Ireland. So, I mean, but people in Scotland are voting for bigger issues than what they have to face, which is again a key for our future on the referendum.
Right.
Well, totally disarmed me by that proposal,
right.
which of course I have to support.
Just briefly to go back to the workers and working people in terms of which way they might go in this election. I mean, Alan Johnson has said that the reason why politicians like Boris Johnson and Michael Gove want to leave the EU is they actually want to get rid of workers' rights. They don't really support workers' rights. They're much better supported in the EU. Do you agree that that is the main motivation behind Boris Johnson and
I
Michael
think
Gove?
if you want to ask people about and put your sticky fingers into their souls and say this is what your real motives are, you should have them here to answer that point.
But would you be worried by that?
What's the fallacy of that argument is many of the social rights which are trumpeted about as European were ones which we actually took into Europe. It's not that, in fact, somehow that workers in this country were bereft of rights until the European until we joined the European Union. I mean, I also think Alan Johnson's other comment today, that he believing that that membership of the European Union is more important to the country and to Labour voters than the Attlee settlement in 1945.
Well,
if he thinks that, I think that's what we need to do in the Leave campaign, is get a really good representation of Labour votes who wish to leave, to do so with their heads high and not feeling this is a prelude to them crossing over to UKIP because they feel they're not represented by the Labour leadership.
It is about whether people will feel that they are better off. Now, we have heard arguments saying that actually perhaps the economics from the Leave side, the economics isn't the overriding issue here for people.
No,
you can take that.
We're only hearing that argument because they're getting soundly beaten on the economics.
That the head on the In campaign, Stuart Rose, said that the wages of low-skilled workers would rise if we left the EU, and he's on the Remain side.
Yeah, well, I mean, he couldn't remember. He couldn't remember the name of the campaign.
We haven't heard of him since.
I see.
He's been sidelined. He's been taken off the shelf in the supermarket. But can I just point out that it's undeniably the case that one of the reasons that the progressive side of politics, by and large, with the exception of Frank and a few others, moved in favour of of Europe in the 1990s was the realisation that Europe was protecting social rights and workers' rights. That was one of the reasons for the shift in the progressive side of politics. And I think that most people still in the Labour Party would reflect. I think the problem with the European referendum to date, incidentally, is that voices like Frank and Jeremy Corbyn, like myself, the SNP, for understandable reasons, because by and large we're focusing on elections in Scotland and London, local elections, haven't had a real look in, and we've seen this internal argument basically within a fractious Conservative Party.
We're going to have to leave it there, but Frank Field, thank you.
Thank you.